So hello everyone and welcome to the Formlabs webinar. My name is Jennifer Milne. I'm one of the design engineers here at Formlabs and I will be hosting this fantastic event. So thanks for joining us from all over the world and joining us here on our new home on Google+. So we're excited to try this out. I'm delighted today to be joined by Sam Jacoby, Will Walker and Matt Keeter. They'll all be talking through different topics, and my colleague Jory will be helping out with questions. So we encourage you during this event to send your questions into us via Twitter, Facebook, or on Google Plus as well using hashtag #AskFormLabs. Jory will be keeping an eye on these throughout, and we will pitch these questions to Samuel and Matt at the end of the session. So here's the agenda for today. Sam's going to kick us off with the latest in company updates and shipping news, followed by Matt, who is going to talk about the new support structures which were released with the latest software update, 0.9.0. And then Will walk us through how to look after your machine and basic maintenance and care of your Form 1. And then, as I said, we'll be taking your questions after that. So some of you may have been around for our first webinar, which was a little more of a high-level overview, and today we hope to go into a bit more detail. So this will be particularly relevant to those of you who already own a machine or you're awaiting the arrival of your Form 1. So with that, here's Sam with the latest in company updates and shipping news.
Thanks, Jenny. We've had a particularly busy couple weeks here at Formlabs. We just got back from Maker Faire, which was a huge success. We put together a number of fantastic projects, some of which you may come across further on in our webinar, in which you can spot on our blog at formlabs.com/blog. We showcased some amazing user prints. These are from Robert Vignone, who graciously lent us some of his amazing works. A digital sculptor and animator, Robert really does fantastic work with the Form 1. With that, I want to move on to talking about the next places you can see us at. Locally, you can spot us at the New Hampshire Tech Fest. That'll be on October 12th. Internationally, we'll be at the 3D Print Show in London from November 7th to 9th, and in Germany, in Frankfurt, at the Euromold Show from December 3rd to 6th. If you're in the area or you can make it, I encourage you to come and stop by. You'll be able to see some of our prints. You'll see the Form 1 in action. You'll be able to ask our team and engineers questions, and we'll do our best to help you out. I also want to go over our latest shipping updates. I know this is something that a number of you track very closely. If you've been following us on Kickstarter or online, you know that on September 13th, we announced that we'd shipped about 712 printers. We were very excited because that concluded our domestic and Canadian shipping sprees. With that, we've been moving on to our international pledges, and we're continuing to ship printers at a pretty rapid clip. Today, I'm excited to announce that we have shipped over 845 printers. You can see the highlighted portion there on the bottom of this screen. Those are the additional printers that we've shipped over the last 2 weeks. It's important to note that this doesn't necessarily mean that there are 145 more machines in Kickstarter backers' hands. The way we are fulfilling international orders is piece by piece. We're bundling shipments on pallets and sending them to a freight forwarder who is dispatching them on our behalf. So we are sending out initial test shipments to a variety of countries to verify that our export and custom processes are sound, that our packaging is holding up to the rigors of international shipping, and that all of our Form 1 printers are arriving in good shape. Initially, we've begun shipments to UK, France, and Germany. So you may have seen that some backers were announcing that they had received shipping notification and indeed their printer shortly after we began. This week we're beginning initial shipments to Italy, Netherlands, and Australia. That doesn't mean that we are neglecting other countries. We are doing our best to produce and ship printers as quickly as possible. We expect no hijinks or issues in this process, and assuming that our production levels stay where they are and we don't encounter any specialized shipping problems, we'll be moving rapidly through the rest of our international pledges. So that's particularly exciting for us, and we will keep you updated as we have more news to give you on the shipping front. With that, I'll turn it back to Jenny.
Yeah, so next up we have Matt Keeter. Matt Keeter is one of our software engineers and was heavily involved in, as I said, the design and development of our new support structures. So delighted he can join us today. He's going to give you a little overview about what's new compared to the original supports you may have been working with already, and go into some of the details of the advanced support settings. So we'll look at that menu, and he'll explain a little bit of what some of these terms mean and how you can use them to get the most out of your Form 1. So with that, here's Matt.
Thanks, Jenny. So like Jenny said, my name's Matt Keeter. I'm a software engineer here, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the brand new supports that we just unveiled last Thursday, right before Maker Faire, in our software release 0.9.0. So if you look at the supports, you can see immediately there's a visual difference. On the left, we have the old supports. On the right, we have the new supports. And so we've transitioned from building up a series of small pin-like towers to each point. And now we're building very sophisticated architectural structures where we march a series of small teeth along the top of a wall. So there are a couple advantages to this new geometry that we're working with. One of the big ones is that we can end up with smaller touch points. They're going to peel off more easily. They're going to leave a smaller mark on your model when they break away. The new geometry is also more robust. We're building some structurally stable architectural scaffolding that's going to hold up your model as it's coming out. This rewrite of the support engine has also enabled us to do internal supports. So instead of supports that go from your model to the ground or to the build platform, we can also make supports that go from one part of your model to another part of your model, with teeth pointing both up and down, so you can break them off. And this is really going to increase the capabilities of the Form 1. You'll be able to print models at orientations that didn't work beforehand, where you'd have unsupported overhangs and things like that. And you can also do things like printing multi-body STLs, where you want to have supports from one part of the STL to another, and they're separate objects. One of the smaller changes that we made to the support structures is the bases. If you look at the picture on the left here, the bases are now much sparser. So instead of being around the entire object, they're much closer to where the supports actually are touching the build platform. This is going to reduce your material usage, and it'll also speed up the critical first layers of your print. So you should get a little bit faster then. The new supports come with a brand new set of settings to learn and play with and figure out. So I'm going to walk you guys through what each of these settings does, kind of one by one. The top three are fairly basic, and then the bottom four are more advanced settings. Let's start with density. This is pretty much what you'd expect it to do. When you turn density down low, you end up with fewer supports on your model, and they're spaced out a little bit more. When you turn density up higher, you end up with more supports very tightly packed. So you might want to change this if you're having trouble with your model not coming out with it breaking off the supports. Or you might want to turn it down if you really want to have a minimal number of touch points on a very delicate model. Next up, we have touch point size. Again, on the left, we have small touch points. On the right, we have large touch points. This is also fairly self-explanatory. When we have smaller touch points, the individual teeth that march along the top of these walls end up smaller. So they're going to leave smaller marks when they break away. But on the other hand, if you have a really solid, chunky object, you might want to increase the touch point size to make sure that it really firmly adheres to the supports and doesn't break off as it's being built. Finally, there's a little checkbox that turns internal supports on and off. This is hopefully self-explanatory, but on the left we have an image without internal supports, and you can see that there are parts shaded in red, and that's showing us that we think that those parts will not print very well. On the right, once you turn on internal supports, it builds these walls that go from one part of the model to another part of the model. Again, with teeth on both the top and bottom, and you see that the red shading has all gone away. It looks like the part is going to print out fine. One thing to note about the red shading is that it's fairly conservative and an approximation, so it's really up to you to use your judgment, but use the red shading as a hint to see when you should look more closely at a model and make sure that it's going to come out. As you print more and more models, you'll start getting a better intuition for what kind of geometries are going to work well. And that intuition combined with the shading should be a good way of deciding whether or not you can send a print to the printer. Now I'm going to do a quick summary of the more advanced settings. These are the ones that appear when you press the Advanced Settings button in the Support Settings panel. Base thickness, it's a little arrow showing it on this picture, but it's very simply the thickness of the base. This is something you probably won't have to change very often, but if you're having problems with your base adhering to the build platform, it could be something you might want to play with. Slope factor is a little bit cryptic, but what it does is it controls how we do spacing of support points on sloped things. So if you turn up slope factor, you'll end up with more teeth on angled surfaces. If you turn it down, you'll end up with fewer teeth on angled surfaces. Flat spacing is another way to control how densely the supports are packed. So if you increase it, you'll end up with larger gaps between the primary supports. These are the ones that have arches and multiple walls coming together. If you make it smaller, these will be more closely packed together. Finally, height above base is exactly what it sounds like. So it's the minimum distance between the bottom of the model and the top of the base. So you can turn this up if you're having trouble breaking your model off of the base. For example, if those walls are too short and they're fairly stiff. Or if you want to make very small models and you want to minimize the amount of resin used, you can turn that down. And then you end up with models that are much closer to the build platform. It might be a little bit harder to break off those bottom supports, but it's going to be smaller on the Z direction. Finally, a couple of tips for layout. One thing that we get asked about a lot is printing flat surfaces. And we recommend that you print flat surfaces at an angle, maybe 20 or 30 degrees. You can think of this as because if you have a flat plane, then all of a sudden on a single layer you have this entire plane trying to be held up by a set of small teeth. So you might see some sagging in between those teeth. When you tilt it at an angle, the plane is being held up both by the teeth supporting it and partially by previous layers of that flat plane. So that's really going to improve your print quality if you have a lot of big flat surfaces in the model. One other thing to think about is positioning your parts within the build platform. So you might want to do things like putting very tall supports away from the peel side of the printer. And that's because even though tall supports are stiffer and reinforced, they're more likely to bend and flex during the peel process. So you want to put those in a place where they don't have as many forces on them. Another thing to think about is positioning your parts in the build tray so that you move them around over time. If you print all your parts in the same position of the build tray, that part's going to wear out faster. Because the trays are consumable, because the coating does eventually wear out, if you want to get a long life out of your tray, you should think about moving your parts around. Finally, this probably goes without saying, but if you have very intricate, complicated details, you might want to think about orienting your parts so that those details are on the top. And that'll mean that the little marks that are left when you peel off the supports are not going to interfere with these complicated details. Even though the marks are pretty minimal and they're pretty easy to remove with sanding and post-processing, if you have very intricate surfaces, you might want to put those in such a way that they're not touching the supports. Finally, there's a lot of other things going on under the hood of the software in this 9.0 release. Things like improving model loading, again using NetFab for repair. We've completely reworked the UI, so we've changed all of the dialogues to make them a little bit more friendly and explanatory. We've changed the way that you can slide through slices, and a lot more optimizations going on under the hood. We're really focused on polishing different aspects of the software to really give you a complete, well-rounded experience when you use your Form 1. That's all for me. I'm going to pass it back to Jenny.
Awesome. So that was really interesting and a lot of great detail there. I'm sure if some of you are already working with Preform, a lot of that might have cleared up any small questions you had about some of the names of our advanced support settings and things like that. So now we're going to segue into Form 1 care. So premise here is once you've already set up your print and you've done your best to orient the part in an optimal way, how do you make sure that the print comes out well? So Will's going to cover the key components that make up the optical path of the Form 1 and go into detail about how you can treat each of those with care and look out for signs which might be causing any problems.
Thanks, Jenny. So I'm Will, and I work in customer education and creating advanced modeling techniques and maintenance routines for our printers. So today I'd like to go into 3 topics focused on the optical pathway of the Form 1. The first subject I'll be dealing with is our new gray resin, which is launched. It's been incredibly popular. We're really proud of it, but it also means that you'll be dealing with 2 resins at a time. I'm also going to go over tank maintenance and cleaning that will help you extend the lifespan of your tank and get better quality prints out. Finally, I'd like to talk about the mirror cleaning of the Form 1. This is something that will be very useful to do if you start having degrading print performance, and it's also going to give you an overview of what to do when your mirror gets dusty, smudged, or suffers a resin spill. These maintenance topics should allow you to get peak performance from the Form 1. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is gray resin and maximizing its lifespan. So to maximize this new resin's lifespan, we really recommend taking the following steps. First, we really advise not mixing resins because our power settings are designed specifically for one resin or the other, and when you set a model up in preform, you have to select one or the other. So it's really important that you keep them separate. When you mix resins, our power settings may no longer function as intended, and you might end up with failed prints. Second, we recommend not returning resin to the original bottle once it's been poured, as you may mix partially cured resin in with fresh resin. Doing so will shorten your resin's shelf life. I would also like to emphasize that we recommend using a separate tank for each new resin. There's a couple of reasons for this. One, cleaning tanks between use will result in wasted resin, and it gets to be kind of a sticky deal to deal with. And 2, mixing the 2 will cause failed prints. So if you don't get all the resin out of your tank, you chance having the 2 mix. So as always, finally, we recommend that you store your resin away from sources of light when not in use. Finally, just looking at this image here, we have a real close-up of our gray resin surface, and we're really happy with this. We've noticed that with the gray resin, you tend to have a much smoother surface as an outcome. So it's something to look for as you're designing and choosing which resin to work with. So now I'd like to go into cleaning the Form 1 resin tank. And many of you have been printing for a while now and are aware that inevitably you will get a failed print, which is what we're looking at here in the bottom of the resin tank. Generally, a failed print will result in a cured layer of resin on the bottom of your tank in the shape of your failed part, almost like a shadow, or a partially cured resin floating in your resin tank. I'm going to outline some steps for removing debris left behind after a failed print, which is essential for getting great prints. Now, I want to just mention that while you have to take these steps each time a print fails, it's really important that you clean your tank every time you have a failed print. But it won't hurt your tank if you take these steps every time you have a good print as well. So it's a bit of preventative maintenance that we can take and that we do use here at Formlabs to keep our printers running really well. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is the anatomy of your tank. So here we have an image of the resin tank with some surfaces highlighted. You can avoid damaging your tank by understanding different parts and handling the tank correctly. The tank consists of 2 parts, the acrylic portion of the tank and optical window, which is here indicated by the clear sections of the tank, and the soft silicone layer inside your tank. This is highlighted by the pink shape sitting in the bottom of the resin tank. The silicone layer and the acrylic layer below the silicone layer are both optical surfaces. And it's very important that you never touch either section. So both the silicone layer or the underside of your tank, you want to just keep your hands away from those. It will help avoid smearing or damaging the optical portions of your tank. In order to pick up or move your tank, we recommend that you grip on the side rails of the tank only. So you can see right there we're pointing out where you should be gripping the tank from. Other care tips I'd like to share include using a single resin type per tank. Just generally speaking, you risk less damage to your tank when you switch out the resins. And avoid cleaning with IPA or isopropanol, as this will cause the acrylic to cloud and damage the silicone. When not in use, we recommend storing the tank in a dark, dust-free space. So next, we're going to go into removing cured resin. So when you have a failed print, you'll notice a sort of shadowy, slightly translucent shape sitting on the bottom of your tank, roughly corresponding to where your part was set up in the print in preform. Failed prints generally do stick to this silicone layer, and if not removed, they will cause a failure of subsequent prints, since the build platform will not touch the silicone of the resin tank. So here's how we clean them out. The basic technique is to take the scraper that was included with your form finish kit and run it gently along the bottom silicone surface. And then once you get to the part, you'll encounter a little bit of resistance. At that point, you want to gently pry up and work the blade delicately underneath that cured resin bit, and push that resin bit back to the back of the tank and remove it with tweezers. It's almost like a delicate operation, but as soon as you start to feel it give, it should break away pretty easily. I'm going to just emphasize and back up here and say it's really important that you do not damage or remove the soft silicone layer with your scraper. You must be extremely gentle when scraping along the bottom of the resin tank. It's useful to not start scraping right on the edge of the tank, because that's not an area where the print would occur in any case. So now that you have got the partially cured resin out of or the resin that has been cured out of your tank, the way to dispose of it is to seal it into a clear plastic bag and put it, expose it to sunlight for 1 to 2 weeks. At that point, it will harden and can be disposed of. Next step I'd like to talk about is removing soft cured resin. And so soft cured resin is slightly different. It's caused by old resin or pieces of resin broken off in your tank. And it's important to remove this soft cured resin, as it can stick to your prints and cause it to look like rags have stuck to your parts. Sometimes we also see soft cured resin if your resin tank is getting a little old, or if it's been exposed to sunlight. So you might have some partial curing, and so we want to remove that for sure before we start a fresh print. So to remove it, we've been actually using a flat comb, generally with large tines works a little bit better, and running it through the tank from edge to edge. You want to go really slowly, because you'll start to see the resin build up on the leading surface of your comb. And the reason is, so we want to go slowly to allow the resin to move through the tines of the comb and filter out any bad stuff. Once you've gotten the comb at the back of the tank, you want to pull it up and immediately catch it in a paper cloth or paper towel, and then wipe off all of the partially cured resin and any liquid resin that's stuck to your comb. This is, again, can be disposed of by being placed in a clear plastic bag and cured for 1 to 2 weeks in the sun. Just as an aside, we like to store our combs in a shallow tray or sealed container of isopropanol. That just means that it'll be ready and clean when you're ready to use it. So now I'm going to talk about keeping the Form 1 mirror system in good condition. And here what we're looking at in this image is the Form 1 mirror that's been removed to illustrate the various problems you might encounter. Obviously, we're not recommending removing your mirror from the machine. But in this case, it allows us to see different problems that are happening with the mirror, and it should help you to identify what might be going on with your mirror if you start to experience degrading print performance. So the Form 1 mirror is a first surface mirror, and this means that there is no glass protecting the exposed face. While this results in improved optical performance in our application, it's important to treat the mirror as a delicate optical device. The following procedures are good to take if you're having degrading print performance. Before we begin, it's always important to use gloves when cleaning your mirror to prevent inadvertent dust or smudges from your hands. So if you're having degrading print performance, the first step would be to remove your build platform and then to remove your tank and visually inspect your mirror. If you see a pattern on the mirror that looks similar to this, like a bunch of speckles sitting on the surface of the mirror, you've probably got a dust issue. So cleaning the mirror that has dust can be addressed with two techniques. The first technique is to use compressed air to dislodge dust particles, and we're not showing that here, but essentially it's you take a can of compressed air and use the straw that comes with the compressed air and hold the can upright at least 6 inches from the surface. And the reason that we do that is because sometimes cold liquid can come from a can of compressed air, and that might damage your mirror through thermal shock. Photographic bulbs or squeeze blowers are also fine to try. We call this the non-contact method, and you should try this first. So now in this slide we're actually illustrating the wet contact method. The wet contact method involves folding up a piece of dust-free paper towel, such as a Kim wipe, and then what you'll do is spray the folded up paper with an optical cleaner and wipe along the edge of the mirror. After each wipe, it's useful to change the orientation of the paper towel so that you're using a fresh surface every time. After you've wiped the 4 edges of your mirror, it's good to come in and then clean out the center. The reason that we're doing it this way is so that you're not dragging dust from the edge of the mirror into the center of the mirror. So the next problem that we might encounter with the mirror would be a smudge or a fingerprint. If a fingerprint gets on your mirror, we recommend taking the following steps. Simply take a dry microfiber cloth and using circular motions, clean from the edge to the center of the mirror. So this is a very delicate operation. You don't want to put a lot of pressure on. What might help is doing a gentle cleaning and then inspecting and then going back and doing another polish and inspecting and then doing another polish. It's better to be too delicate and have to polish more than really going in there and taking a risk of gouging your mirror. So the final problem that we might have with our mirror is resin spill. This often occurs if you fail to remove your build platform before changing your tank, and there's a drip of resin that's hanging off your build platform and that drops down onto the mirror. In that case, you might end up with resin on your mirror, and it's extremely important that we get this cleaned off right away, particularly before running the machine again, because in that case, your resin will cure and it's a much more difficult problem to solve. To clean your mirror, start by removing bulk resin with a dust-free paper towel. So you're going to go in and gently swipe along any streaks or spills that you have and try to get as much of the bulk resin off so you only have a thin layer of resin on your mirror. The next step, and we're showing this here, is to flood your mirror with clean, fresh isopropanol alcohol. So in that case, you'll use a paper towel to catch the dripping alcohol and just sort of flood the mirror and remove the paper towel. There will still be resin on your mirror, so you'll need to polish the mirror with a fresh, dust-free cloth or paper towel. In our experience, it usually takes 2 to 3 cycles of this washing to clean the mirror correctly. Okay, so that's all I've got for now. I'm going to pass the microphone back over to Jenny so that we can begin our Q&A session.
All right, thanks, Will. So again, a lot of information in that section, and just a reminder that this will be available on YouTube afterwards, so you can scroll back through, and if there's anything you didn't quite catch there, have a little refresher. So again, thanks to Jory, who's been keeping on top of things. We now have a list of your questions. I'm going to go ahead and start with Sam, since he's had the most time to kind of look through these. So first question for Sam comes from Justin Hawkins. When does the Form 2 release?
This is we're working on the Form 1 now, and we are focusing all of our efforts on making it the best product possible. We're working hard on providing great support documentation. We're working hard on improving our software. We're working hard on analyzing our production processes to improve them, and that's where our focus is going to remain for the foreseeable future. I think certainly as our company matures, we are excited about future products, but we don't have any timeline. Jan asks, are there any spare resin tanks available? Absolutely, yes. If you head to the Formlabs store, that's formlabs.com/store, you'll see that we have spare resin tanks as well as spare build platforms. When working with multiple resins, as Will has described, it's very helpful to pick up a couple of spares. If you're seeing print failures, replacing your resin tank might be a really good idea. There are some questions as well about the precision and resolution of the Form 1. I want to suggest that users with detailed questions and concerns about calibration issues head over to our support forums, which you can find on our support pages at support.formlabs.com, where there are a number of discussions where people are investigating the kind of performance that they get out of the Form 1. I will say that we have a growing engineering team that is working on improving every facet of the Form 1. We are hiring constantly, so head over to our jobs pages, which we can speak to in more detail later. But we are doing our best to make sure that the Form 1 meets the needs of the most demanding applications out there.
All right, thanks, Sam. There were a couple of questions which stood out to me that I would be happy to take right now as well. So kind of a technical question from Michael Hafner. He says, there's a clicking during peeling issue. Should you stop the print if this happens? So in this scenario, the first thing I would encourage you to do is to write into support@formlabs.com. Basically, while someone will be able to answer your ticket, it also helps us kind of keep track of issues and prioritize things. So it all goes into improving the product. But on this specific issue, clicking during peeling, we don't recommend that you cancel the print. We have seen this behavior, and it's particularly prominent when you're printing something with a large surface area. It can kind of be exacerbated by just that, peeling from a large surface area. And it doesn't mean that your print will not print successfully. So what we usually encourage people to do when they write in with this problem is to let the print finish, and then if there is an issue with the part, to photograph the problem you're having, and we'll take that discussion offline and see if it's there could be another issue, or more often than not the part actually comes out well. As Sam says, we're working to improve the product in every facet, and that is a behavior we're trying to minimize. And so then a question from Justin Hawkins, who says, if the resin shouldn't be returned to the bottle, where do you suggest putting it? So generally the practice we encourage is that you use a separate tank for each type of resin. So you would have 2 resin tanks, one for gray and one for clear. And so at any time you either have fresh resin which remains in the bottle, or you have resin which you're currently using which remains in your tank. So when switching between different types of resin, you would simply clean your build platform between uses, and you would wrap and store the entire tank. So right now we just suggest that either you can wrap it in tin foil or just put it in a dark cupboard or some other area where it's going to be covered. You want to cover it so that no dust and things like that get in, and just store it out of light, and then switch that back in. And finally, for me, a question: what if you leave the resin in the tank for days? Is this okay? So yes, this is okay. As I say, the general use is either the resin is fresh and in the bottle, or it's in your tank. So the orange cover protects the resin from curing due to external UV, and you can leave it in there for several days. We recommend you simply top this up and keep using it throughout your print process. Someone did post on the forums showing some slight separation in the gray resin when left for several days. You start to see little gray pigment, and that's something we've been looking into internally, and we've really found that it's not an issue. You can simply stir it up, and even if you don't stir it up, it will still print well. All right, so next we're going to move to some questions for Matt. So Matt, Justin Hawkins asks, have you considered stacking objects with supports between the objects in a kind of tower?
Yeah, so right now when you open different STLs in Preform, it's going to treat each STL independently. So if you have a couple of different STLs that are overlapping each other, it's not going to do supports between them. If on the other hand you pre-process the files and take all of your meshes and put them all into one STL initially, then because that's treated as a single model in Preform, that will generate proper stacking and internal supports. between the different bodies in that multi-body STL. There's also a question from Michael Hafner that asks, do the new support structures use more resin than the old ones? So when we were developing these over the summer, we ran a bunch of different tests, and the answer is really it's kind of a wash. Some of them use more, some of them use less. There's no cases where it's a dramatic increase in either direction, so it's really about the same.
Awesome, thanks, Matt. All right, Will, your turn. A couple questions for you. It's a Sin asks, do you have any suggestions on cleaning your work area? His desk is starting to get a little sticky.
Okay, I can totally relate to this. I've been working on designing our industrial workstation, and stickiness is definitely something you want to avoid. To unstick your work area, I recommend using a paper towel with IPA. Gel-based cleaners that have alcohol in them, such as Purell, also do wonders in terms of getting things off and are really good at getting your hands on sticky after a print. If you allow your work area to be exposed to sunlight as well, you'll also cure any sticky resin, which should be able to be peeled away from plastic surfaces. Finally, I'd just like to mention we keep a generous supply of paper towels and gloves always at hand. And generally, when I'm working with finishing a part, after I'm done, I'll just use a little bit of Purell to sort of clean off my gloved hands before I go on to do the next task. So that's basically my recommendations.
All right. Ray Noritaki asks, if I am modeling a large solid object, say a cube, is it better to build it as a solid or as a hollow box? Okay,
hi Ray. I generally recommend using hollowed out forms when possible. There's a couple of reasons for this. Number one, it will reduce your resin usage and generally make less wear and tear on your tank, so you'll result in a lower costing part. It also, since you have less resin being used, you have a smaller area being cured, so it's a faster print and it's generally more efficient. But I understand that we still want strong parts. So when making a hollow part, I recommend using at least a 2mm wall thickness to create a strong wall. Also, make sure that you leave a drain hole on the bottom and the top of your part to allow liquid resin to escape.
Great, and then one question from Chris Marsh. It says, my parts need to be black when they're finished, and I've struggled a bit with the spray paints and find that, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce this, Tamiya model spray paint works the best. Do you have any other recommendations for paints and painting techniques?
Hey, Chris, thanks for the recommendation and the question. We'll definitely look into Tamiya model spray paints. Around the Formlabs headquarters, we use Krylon Fusion brand plastic spray paints. We find these to be really excellent for use as a primer since they form a paintable surface and adhere very well to the model surface. Generally speaking, once you've got that primer on there, you can switch to acrylic paints, you can switch to airbrush paints, you can try a whole number of different solutions because you've created a surface that other paints will easily adhere to.
Great. All right. I think there's a couple more just coming in that Sam's going to jump back in and handle.
Hi, this is a feature request we get a lot from David. It would be great if you could add a small raised edge at the floor of your supports to make it easy to get the paint scraper under there. That's something that we've looked at and experimented on early. It's definitely something that we may consider in future revisions. One option that we would encourage anyone to test out would be to print out a variety of rafts with various bevels and see what works best. It may very well be a great solution to difficult to remove parts. At the moment, we have no firm plans. Robert asks, are you planning to add translate, rotate, and scale locators, like in Maya, into the Form software? I'll say this, the Preform software is very young, and we are looking at adding features and plugins and a variety of tools that make your life easier. So that means if you have a request here, share it with us. Let us know. Do you want selectors like in Maya? Great. We'll have a conversation with our team and see how that might look. Similar to these requests for a variety of different support structures and similar. We are looking at our product and improving it all of the time, so you should definitely share those with us. You can do that in our support forums, which you can find online through our support site. We have a whole section called feature requests that we certainly look at and keep track of. I want to also address a specific question about Belgium. I know sometimes Belgium can feel overlooked in the broader global tapestry. We are not fulfilling orders on any particular structure, i.e. we're not going to ignore a small country simply because there's only a few orders from it. We are progressing through our shipping orders with respect to how we resolve our customs and our export processes. I can't say specifically when printers are going to go out to Belgium, but I would expect that they will go out in part of a general block of printers that we are shipping to Europe in general. I also, there's a somewhat more technical question here, which is shown up since we started shipping gray resin. Novitas Wolfman asks, I left the gray resin in the tank for a week and it ended up cloudy. The pigment had separated. I had to gently mix it, but I'm not sure if this will affect print quality. What I'll say is that from our experience, that is totally normal. A brief agitation with a scraper can help the pigment recombine with the resin. If you use your printer frequently, the regular peel motion of the tank itself should help keep the pigment combined. We're doing ongoing research on our resins and their performance over time, and that's certainly something that we're looking at.
Okay, I've got two interesting questions I'd like to just touch on right here. It's a Sin has a follow-up question for cleaning the tank, which is how do you suggest cleaning the bottom laser side of the tank if it was accidentally touched? So I'm assuming that we're talking about a fingerprint smudge, which would degrade your print performance. Generally speaking, we would recommend using the same or similar technique to what we recommended for the mirror, which is, I guess you're going to have somebody hold the tank for you because you have to reach underneath of it while you're working. But you'll want to take a microfiber cloth and some optical cleaner, and first take the microfiber cloth and just try to polish that surface and polish the fingerprints away, and then follow up with some optical cleaner and a dust-free paper towel or a dust-free cloth. And again, several rounds is probably the best way to go in terms of cleaning that up. Novitas Wolfman said, I noticed that solid prints fail more than hollow ones. Is this because of the peel mechanism? So while I can't specifically speak to any one particular print, we have seen many people print very solid, very thick parts, and we've noticed that, generally speaking, the success rates of these parts has to do with having them very well supported. So as Matt was speaking about earlier, make sure that the size of the teeth may be bumped up. That will give you a little bit more bulk to kind of support your print as it happens, and also increase the support density if you're having trouble with your part coming out. Oftentimes, a failure will start because it'll just be a tiny little bit of a model that isn't properly supported, and it will start tearing off from the rest of the model and leaving and curing on the floor of your tank, your resin tank. So at that point, that's really an indicator that you should increase your support density.
All right, and I'm just going to go through a few of the other open questions I see here. So Wendy Staub asks, how large does a drain hole have to be? I do not have a specific answer off the top of my head, but I do know we have a support article which talks about drain holes. So I would encourage you to search for that term on our support forum and look for answers there. If the article is somewhat lacking in the detail you're looking for, I would also encourage you to reach out to our community, because I'm sure a lot of people are experimenting with that. And we'll try to build up that article with more information. So Justin Hawkins has an important question, just saying, how much have you looked into long-term exposure of fumes from the resin? We do encourage that you work in a well-ventilated area. And with this question, I simply need to direct you to our MSDS. We have the Material Safety Data Sheet online, which is the best resource. It contains a lot of important information about our resins. So we keep that updated with new releases. So there's a gray one as well. Let's see, any last questions here? All right, I think we'll probably wrap it up there. So I have a few more comments. Firstly, this is our second webinar. We're still learning as we go, and as you'll see today, we're experimenting with Google Hangouts. So we'd love to hear your feedback on this event, specifically if the content was relevant and interesting and things like that. It's a very quick survey, and we'd really appreciate if you took the time to answer those questions. And finally, here's just a rundown of some of the key resources we've mentioned. Obviously, our support site. We're constantly updating that, support.formlabs.com. General questions can be found on our FAQ at formlabs.com, pages, FAQ. And as ever, if you have any questions, especially if you're having any printing issues or seeing some strange behavior, please do write in to support@formlabs.com. You very well may hear from one of Jory, Sam, myself, or Will, and any number of our growing customer support team. And we're constantly learning from the information you're sharing with us, and it's a great asset for hopefully solving your problems and continuing to improve the Form 1. So that's it from us. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we will keep you posted on upcoming events. Thanks for joining us from all around the world, and if you can make it out to any of the events Sam mentioned, we look forward to seeing you there. Enjoy the rest of your day.